everybody, to the Friday episode of the Diamond Bandits. How is everyone? We have a really cool episode this week. Why? Because we are talking to one of the hottest rising stars in comic books today. I'm talking about writer Chris Condon. Chris did the book That Texas Blood. He's doing Green Arrow, and it was just announced about a week ago at New York Comic Con that he is working on Ultimate Wolverine for Marvel. So he is slowly moving up the ladder. I think he might have hinted towards that in our interview. But Chris is a phenomenal young writer. Folks have been raving about the work he's done. So we have an interview with him to talk about how he got into writing, what his process is, and it's really a great time. So without any further ado, here is Chris, writer Chris Condon. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a thrill.
So let's talk from the very, very beginning. How did you first discover comic books?
Um, I grew up in the 1990s, so it kind of went with the territory. I one of the first movies I ever saw, I'm pretty sure it was the first movie I ever saw, was Batman 89. So that was one of the first things that I ever encountered in my life, and that was Batman related. So it was right there. It was pretty much comics from the start. But I also happened to grow up in a great time for comic book media. Even if the movies weren't good, there was, I grew up around, the Phantom and Steel and like all that kind of stuff too. So it's like all that stuff was coming out. So I was aware of that stuff. I was young, but I was aware of that stuff. But I also happened to have great comic book stuff like Batman the Animated Series and Superman the Animated Series and the X-Men series and Spider-Man, and like all the other Marvel series that were out, which there was Hulk and Iron Man and all of that. Justice League later. But how I actually got to comic books, I'm pretty sure because my parents were never collectors. My brother wasn't a collector. I'm the odd person out in my family. My uncle was a painter, so I was always kind of drawn to art.
Mhm.
Um, but one of the things that I think kind of cemented it for me, aside from, like I said, just sort of being around it in other forums, I think the first time that I probably could have gotten into contact with a comic book was in 1997, when not the greatest superhero movie came out, but Batman and Robin. And they had a deal, which I have like my feelings about that movie. Like I'm okay with it. It's just like it's not a great movie, and it's maybe not. It's like a weird thing where it's like they're leaning into the 60s
Mhm.
series a little bit, but it just doesn't really jive. But whatever. Um, that's the movie that did it, I think, because at Toys R Us,
Mhm.
if you bought a toy, a Batman and Robin toy, they would give you it was a free facsimile edition of either the first appearance of Batgirl or the first appearance of Mr. Freeze, which was I believe he was what was it, Dr. Zero or something like that. I think it was Mr. Zero.
Mhm.
Maybe that was it. Mr. Zero, his original name. And I think also Robin and maybe Poison Ivy. I never got that one, but that was the first time that I kind of came into comic books,
Mhm.
aside from reading the funnies in the paper. So I was always kind of around it. It was always kind of there, but the actual comic books I think came from there. And I was also lucky enough to grow in a town that had a comic shop.
Okay.
So once I was into it and knew that I liked it, and knowing that there was a comic shop around, I would go and I would, go through the dollar bins, the quarter bins when those used to be a thing,
Mhm.
uh, and just flip through and buy random issues of, 70s Daredevil and stuff like that. And that's kind of how I came into the whole thing.
So, how does the decision get made to pursue comics as a career?
I'd kind of always been drawing and writing my own comics,
Mhm.
ever since I was a kid. I'm pretty sure I've gone back and I found old like wrestling books that I made,
Mhm.
and I made pretty much a comic book. I didn't think it was a comic book at the time, but I made a comic book about the Titanic because that was another, 90s kid thing. Titanic movie. It's around. So I was always kind of doing that stuff anyway. And then, when I got older, I was writing and drawing them with my friend Mike, and he still works on stuff with me now for our series. And he just recently did a pitch for me. He designed it. So, I just kind of have always been doing it, and I was trying to actually break into the film industry as a writer and director, but I was just having no success with this thing. But luckily I had already contracted Jacob Phillips to do concept art for me for that. And I'd previously worked with Duncan Figueiredo on a poster for another film, and that's how I got Jake involved.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of already, as you can see, my thinking was always kind of comic books, even when I was doing other stuff. And I just was getting frustrated with trying to make it as a film and just getting frustrated with because you need money to do it as a film. And I had always thought comics were a viable medium. I don't know why we didn't just do it there. And I was actually thinking of drawing and writing my own thing at that time. And that was when I said, well, I already have this and it's already kind of going because I already have art created for it. So why don't we just do that as a comic book?
Mhm.
And that was really where it came into play. And then thinking about that, breaking it down into a pitch, what does a series look like, and all that, and everything came from that. Sort of thinking about, okay, well, if we're going to do this as a series, what kind of stories do we tell? How do we format it?
Mhm.
All that.
I want to get into that in a second, but I want to talk about your relationship with Jacob because you said you've known him for a while. How do you guys bounce? Do you bounce ideas off each other? Is it a very collaborative process, or you just sort of give him the ideas and he takes the art from there?
I mean, it's a little bit of everything.
Mhm.
We've known each other since 2017. So and from there, it was like at the start, it was a very business relationship, very transactional. I provide materials to him, he provides materials to me, I pay him. That was how it worked.
Mhm.
But we did like each other's stuff,
Gotcha.
which helped. And then so in just crafting a series together, you end up talking so often and so much, and he's become a great friend now.
Mhm.
And that's obviously since 2017, so it's been a couple of years. But in terms of our collaboration, we're working on something now that's not that Texas Blood related,
Mhm.
and we had kind of done some concept art previously, so that exists.
Mhm.
So we did have that. But he'll kind of float an idea about what kind of how he wants to draw it, and I'll like most likely I'll just say like, oh, that sounds awesome. Or I'll hit him back with another idea too. And that's kind of how, and then vice versa with story. I'll send him some ideas and I go, what do you think of that? And he'll be like, oh, that sounds cool. And that's essentially how we do it, is like we just kind of run everything by each other. And then, since this isn't with Image, this thing that we're doing, so I sent him the script before I sent it to the publisher we're working with,
Mhm.
and just said like, hey, like, what do you think of this? And he dug it. So so that's kind of how, he has to give it the green light before I do anything. And that was the way it's been with Texas Blood, that's been the way it's been with Enfield, and vice versa. He sends me layouts, he sends me pencils. He doesn't tend to do concept work in terms of like, character sketches or anything like that.
Mhm.
Um, so we don't really have that, but in terms of like layouts and pencils and inks, he always sends those to me as if I'm going to give notes, and I never do really. But that's our collaboration. I feel like we sort of just trust each other.
Mhm.
I think is maybe the best way of putting it. We just, we both feel like we like each other's stuff and we trust each other to do the work
Mhm.
well. And luckily, we both haven't phoned it in. So at least I hope not. I'm not trying to.
Let's go back to pitching this to Image. How does a creator do that, and what are the processes that make that happen?
Well, I don't really know what other people do, but we just sent it to the email, the submissions email.
Okay.
So we didn't send, I know that his dad is Sean Phillips, and obviously he's got a relationship with Image, but we didn't utilize that because A, we didn't want to, we wanted it to stand on its own, and B, we didn't even really, I never wanted to use his name
Mhm.
as like a tool. Like I feel like that's like what some other shady people might have done if they were working with somebody who's a Phillips. I just liked his stuff, and I happened to see it in his father's book, and that was how we met and how we started collaborating. But it was just that I liked his stuff, and it was the same thing with when I got Duncan Fagredo to do the poster for one of my short films, was that it wasn't that I wanted to, ooh, I'm gonna get a name like Duncan Fagredo to do the poster. It wasn't never that. It was just that one of my favorite comics of all time is well, not just one, but all the Hellboy issues that he drew for Mike Mignola. I think, in my mind, as much as I love Mike Mignola, I think my two favorite Mignola verse artists are not Mike Mignola. And I actually think it's Guy Davis and Duncan Fagredo. I'm sorry, Mike Mignola. I still love Mike Mignola, but those are my two favorites. I love how, I love Duncan's interpretation of that world and how he brought it to life.
Mhm.
And to have him doing anything that I was adjacent to was like, this is amazing. So that was really what it came down to. And yeah, same thing for Jake. So yeah, but in terms of like the submissions process, yeah, we just sent it to the I forget what it's. I think it's literally just submissions at imagecomics.com or something, just like their blanket submissions email.
Mhm.
And we only sent it that I thought we were gonna not hear back at all, in fact. But it was free to submit, so why not? Is kind of my perspective. So we submitted there, we submitted a bunch of other places, and we got a few no's from other places. Most of those places had nice things to say about the pitch, but they were in a position where they couldn't take on new material, or for whatever reason they just couldn't, they had to pass.
Mhm.
And then we kind of thought it was dead. And obviously I'm frustrated because I was like, oh, I thought this was like a viable option. I thought like this was a no-brainer.
Mhm.
And then about 4 months, 5 months later, we got an email from Eric Stevenson that if you haven't found a home for this yet, I'd like to have it. And so luckily, we hadn't signed off with another company, and so we climbed on board. And that's the story. I mean, I don't know what the best option to go about is, but I think that's a pretty good option because I think that if the work is good, it'll speak for itself, and I think that that's the best you could do. And obviously posting stuff online, I think that one of the things that I've talked to with Andrew Kroenke, who did Bloodrick recently at Image, how he went about it was that he just he made an ash can, he printed out an ash can copy of his book or whatever his book was at that time, but it was like a Bloodrick adjacent thing. And he just brought it to conventions and like handed it around to people. And one of those people was Kirkman.
Oh,
And
okay.
Kirkman sent it to Stevenson.
Mhm.
And so that's how, so it's like it all depends, but I think it depends on the work. If the work is good,
Mhm.
doesn't matter how well connected you are. If you just put the work out there, people will find it. And that's what I'll say about that.
How have you found working with Image editorially? Are they very much involved with everything you do, giving you notes and feedback, or are they a little more hands off and let you sort of handle the project?
Well, how do I put it? There is no editorial at Image. It's just
Gotcha.
us. It's just us. That's the wonderful thing about it.
Mhm.
So if there's anything wrong with the comic, all you can do is blame us, really. Um, but yeah, the only thing that they do is right before we send it to print, we get notes with oh, you forgot a comma here, this balloon, the tail's going the wrong way, things like that. Like very small fixes. But they never tell us about like story or you can't have this. I mean, working with Marvel or DC
Mhm.
now, sometimes you'll get notes about, oh, you have too many panels on this page. And when I work with Jake, it's just like, there's no question about it. We just do it. He makes it work sometimes. And I am always of the mind that it's like, if he can find a way to do it without an extra panel, cool. And so sometimes he'll subtract or whatever. I always kind of take it from the perspective of this is the base
Mhm.
that we're building off of. This is black and white. You're bringing it to life. Like sometimes these things don't work.
Right.
And I think that's the way it is with any sort of collaborative medium or any script, really, is that like you can't always do what you've written, so you kind of have to figure out other ways to do it. And like I might have an idea about how to do it in panels, like 6 panels, and then Jake will look at it and go, "I think we could do this in one."
Okay.
Make it a splash page, and I go, "Oh, well, let's just do that then."
Right.
And it just makes sense. And that's part of the collaboration too, is him looking at what I've written and going, "What about this?" And vice versa. Sometimes he'll send me something and I'll go, "What about this?" And so that's kind of really how it happens.
Right.
But yeah, there's no real editorial oversight, I'll say, at Image, which is one of the amazing things about them is that they just, they let us do what we want. And that's why they're the best publisher in the industry, bar none.
Where does that Texas blood start? What's the kernel for creating this book?
Uh, wish I knew. I've always had a fascination with the West.
Mhm.
I've always really loved Westerns. I've always loved sort of dark and gritty tales. I've always loved noir. And I think that that's sort of the nugget of where all this stuff starts for me is this, because the West, especially Texas, is this sort of like frontier land, anything can kind of happen.
Mhm.
It's kind of a great place to set a story. Um, but yeah, in terms of where it kind of came from, there was an idea that I had for a story a long time ago called Texas Blood, and that was essentially what the first arc was with Randy
Mhm.
and his brother Terrell, Randy and his brother Travis Terrell.
Mhm.
And so that was essentially that story, and there was the sheriff figure in that, although he wasn't called Joe Bob at the time.
Right.
And then I just had a whole lot of other stories that kind of took place in Texas, not necessarily in the same place.
Mhm.
Um, so I was setting a lot of things in Texas, and I don't really know why, aside from the fact that I just like the location.
Right.
I just was always kind of gravitating towards it for whatever reason. And it's fate, I guess. Um, but because of that, when we came to do the series, I had already started writing all these stories in Texas, and they were all kind of in the same area, West Texas mostly. That I just decided, what if we just put all these in the same county,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden we have a series,
Right.
And then yeah, that wasn't, 100% the case though. I mean, there are new stories that we built into it, including Ebersol 1981, our second arc was a original idea. Taking a character from another thing though
Mhm.
and placing that, and that was where Ebersol came from. It came from another idea. And then same thing with the third arc of that Texas Blood. That was also, a separate idea. But there's these other ideas that I'm talking about that'll come into fruition later. But it just kind of gave us a base to build from.
Do you go in with a concrete beginning and an end in mind, or is there room for it to expand and change along the way?
Um, I go in with an idea of an ending,
Okay.
and it often changes based on how the middle goes. Because I don't always have it. I don't like to plan it out that much because I kind of like to let it breathe.
Mhm.
And I like to let it live a little bit and be organic and unique. And that's kind of, again, working with like a big two company, it's a little different because you need to outline everything and everybody needs to approve everything.
Right.
So it's a little different that way, but I like it to be organic and feel real to me. And kind of, I live with the characters. And if it makes sense for the characters to be doing certain things, that's kind of how I like to have it dictate what I do. But like with something like the third volume of that Texas Blood, spoiler alert, if you haven't read it, you should check it out. It's one of my favorite things that I've written. Um, but in that, like, well, I won't even spoil it. I'm not going to spoil it. I'll just say that I knew where I wanted to end it,
Right.
and I needed to get the character to a place where they do the thing that I needed them to do. So
Mhm.
I needed to get them so down and out that they were going to do this thing that was pretty drastic and it's a pretty heated moment, and I needed it to feel real and authentic. And I feel like we got that person to that place, but um, it wasn't so planned out that I knew like how I was going to get there. But I had I had a path
Right.
like chiseled out, roughly where I
Mhm.
was going to go. I didn't have it, completely set, and I
You,
rarely do. I don't think I usually do.
you mentioned real and authentic, and I think that's one of the most outstanding things about the characters in your book. But how do you create a character? Like, is it a personality trait that you start with, or an occupation, or a name or a look? And where do you begin and start to build?
Um, that's a good question, actually. I don't really, I'm trying to think of where I do start. I kind of think that hmm, so I don't always have a name immediately, but I'll probably have a name and then I'll just kind of branch out from there and I'll kind of think about where they are. I think that location is a big indicator for me of what kind of, what kind of occupation this person probably works. If they're in like, you know, Eastern Pennsylvania, they'll have a different job than they would if they were in Texas or whatever, so that, but like, yeah, jobs. And also I start building out a backstory
Mhm.
a little bit and try to build out a little bit of who I think that person is. So like one of the things I did with Joe Bob right from the start was I wrote a first person story from his perspective. And then I kind of got to know him there. And I'm pretty sure that's where the well and all that kind of came in. It was through that.
Mhm.
So I mean, I don't think that I have like a set way that I do it, but I mean, I don't know, and I like to see how people react with other characters. I it sounds very weird and like sort of esoteric, but like I kind of like let them live because I don't really know the dialogue ahead of time.
Right.
So I'll just kind of let the characters speak to the other characters,
Mhm.
see how it goes. And so that's another way of building characters is that, when I created Lou
Mhm.
for that Texas Blood, like I didn't know all of her backstory, but I knew that she was at the sheriff's office for a while. So I knew she had a relationship with Joe Bob to some extent. But then thinking about wanting to have her be kind of the lead of the third arc
Mhm.
and thinking about what kind of a relationship does she actually have with him,
Right.
and getting to build that out and kind of thinking that, myself that, oh, like maybe she and he kind of have like an unspoken, whether it's attraction or what, but they have this thing for each other and they both respect each other and they care for each other. And if it is attraction, it's something that they can never act on.
Right.
So it's like, so that's like a thing that I wanted to build into their relationship, and I knew that going into it. So that's the thing is that I like to have like an ensemble characters that I can know their relationships and how they interact with people. And, if somebody is standoffish, why they're standoffish, and like they have a reason for it. They're not just being, obtuse for no reason whatsoever. I like to have reasons for things because I think that most people do have reasons for why they act the way they act. I mean, my brother's not me, you know, and that's kind of, so I try to break that down because I think that that's something that kind of fascinates me is like, why do people act the way they act? Like, why are they doing these things? Like, why do they, why would a character like Joe Bob sort of let this, the casserole dish go, at the time and all that, so just like things like that, that you're sort of like, why would this character do this? And, that's what I like. It's just building out their universe and their life and kind of feeling like, oh, they if they feel real to me as a character, then it will feel real, obviously, to a reader, I think. And luckily it's been working out.
Do you ever find yourself surprised about how some of the characters have evolved and changed from where they began to where they are now?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I didn't really Joe Bob is one, but I didn't really know how it was going to evolve. Um, because I mean that character had gone through so many different iterations.
Mhm.
I think at one time he was actually called Orin.
Really?
Yeah. And so, but I kind of just you chip away and them and then and if they sit with you for long enough, they become real in a way.
Right.
Because it's like I know his voice when I write him. Like it's like I know his voice. Like I just know how he sounds. And so I mean, but in terms of like surprise and in terms of how they evolve, Lou was a surprise. I didn't really know. that she was going to be who she was. But I'm glad we did that third arc because I'm that's like a piece of her now that
Mhm.
I didn't think was going to exist, and I'm glad it does because I think that it really gives her character uh strength and a story, and she's not just a piece of a tapestry. She's a whole thing
Mhm.
on her own. I think that Eversol is a complicated person that I enjoyed writing him across the pages because at first he just sort of comes across as this uh almost I don't want to say character, but he is a character for
Mhm.
sure. And just kind of getting down to who he is a little bit and his interactions with Joe Bob. I think that Joe Bob humanizes characters for me because I get him so well that when he interacts with other people and he gets through to them, that it's like a big thing. But like one of the big moments for me with Joe Bob was in Arc 3 when he loses his cool
Mhm.
at a rally,
Mhm.
political rally, and that was a moment that I did know that I wanted to do that. I just again didn't really I needed to build up the moment to get him to that place where it felt authentic, where he would do that. So that was something that I wanted to do though, because I wanted to see him break from his like he's so frustrated by all this stuff that's going on. I wanted him to break loose and kind of be free
Mhm.
to speak his mind because he doesn't do that so often.
Yeah.
And so that's why I wanted to do then, and then same thing with Enfield, I feel like you just kind of, I didn't know Enfield was going to be who he was.
Mhm.
I kind of hoped that I would like him, and it turned out that I did a lot.
Mhm.
And same thing with, Amy, uh, his partner that I didn't really know. I figured that they would probably be an important part of the story,
Mhm.
but I didn't know 100%, and in writing them I was like, oh my God, they're the stars. Like they need to lead us there. And that, yeah, it was just kind of, I don't know, I let the characters kind of build and just build themselves in a way. Um, it sounds very voodoo
No, it
weird.
makes perfect
It's
sense.
but it's, I don't know. I mean, I that's just the way I do it. I don't know.
From where you were as a writer when you submitted this pitch to where you are right now, are there
Yeah.
certain issues you can look at as sort of evolutionary points for you writing or growing as a writer?
Um, yeah, I think that one of the big things for me was volume 3 of that Texas Blood. I think kind of again coming back to that one. I think that I did that in a way where I wrote very little dialogue, as opposed to what we were typically doing. There's still dialogue in it for sure, but I cut down a lot of what I was doing. And it's largely a silent comic, and that was on purpose because I think the silence is a big
Mhm.
um, part of suspense. I think that, if I'm in a silent room, I'm a lot more alert.
Mhm.
And I think I wanted to bring that to the comic. And I think Enfield was another one that just kind of, we put ourselves in a box of we have to do 3 panel pages and splash pages, and we did cheat on occasion, but it was primarily 3 panel pages and splash pages. And it's like, okay, how do you tell a story with these, in these confines? How do you do it in a short, you know, in a short issue?
Mhm.
So, or in a standard issue, I should say. So that was, yeah, so those were really big stepping stones for me. And then also, the big one would probably be Harley Quinn. Doing Harley Quinn was a big one as well.
Mhm.
Because that was a character that I know and love. And
Right.
like, how do you tackle a character that you know and love? And my immediate response, because I love comics and I love their history and I love these characters and how other people have written them, is that I like to write it in concert with what's come before. I like to like interact with the past and all that. So I wanted to do our version of what if Mad Love was skewed? What if something happened with Mad Love?
Mhm.
The Bruce Timm Paul Dini story. So Yeah, I think that, and that was like a big one for me because it kind of taught me how to do big two stuff to an extent. Um, yeah, because I wasn't really, it was fine. But I wasn't that happy with Crypt of Shadows, the story I did for Crypt of Shadows. Like, it's fine. I don't think it's bad, but I think it's sort of just read as like a sort of typical thing. And I think it was something else before I got editorial notes in, which was again, there was no narration, there was no voiceover, and I was just letting the scenes kind of play out.
Right.
And then there was dialogue, a little bit of dialogue, but it was just, thunderstorm atmosphere, things happen, and they wanted, oh, we want to know what she's thinking in all these places. So then having to do that, and it just stops feeling like your stuff at a certain point because there is so much editorial oversight. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that's the way that it is.
Right. Because I was lead me to where I was going to say next, because you know you're used to creating your own worlds. I mean, you've created all this when you're playing with someone else's toys, and they have this history and they have certain parameters on them and the way marketing wants them to do and this and that. Is it a challenge for you creatively, or you just kind of go with the flow with what they're looking for?
Uh yeah, I mean I definitely think it's a challenge because there's because you're I mean to from one perspective you're hired.
Right.
You're hired to do a job, so you need to do the job,
Mhm.
right? So it's like any job, you're hired, you need to come in, you need to do the job, and you need to do it well.
Right.
And so there's that sort of pressure
Mhm.
on you from that perspective, but also in terms of the characters, like for this Daredevil thing that I just did, I don't know whether it's good or not, but jury's out on that one. It hasn't come out yet. It's out in September. It's actually out on my brother's birthday, September 25th. But to get to write that, I really wanted when I was first brought on board, it was just Elektra. So it was just going to be Elektra Daredevil. And so I like Elektra. I've always liked Elektra, but I haven't read Elektra in years.
Mhm.
So what I did was I called a friend of mine who has all of the Frank Miller stuff. I was like, hey, can I borrow that? Like I have a smattering of stuff, but he has all of it. So I called him up and I was like, hey, can I borrow that stuff? And I just read everything Elektra. And the way that I actually kind of handled it, which is odd, but it's just this is how I wanted to try to do it, was that I felt like he had such a distinctive voice for her that I felt not that other people don't do it as well, but they have a different voice for her. I feel like she has a different voice and a different feel than she did then.
Mhm.
And that happens over time, but I also really like how he wrote her, Frank Miller. So how I handled it was that having just read all of it, like Electra Assassin and Born Again, everything. I don't think is she in Born. I don't think she's in Born Again. What was the one that she's in? I can't forget. I can't remember now. But anyway, um, I wrote like basically a poem, but in her voice.
Okay.
Just about because the whole thing is about these zombiotes, right? So it's like this tie-in, this Venomore tie-in. So there's these thing called zombiotes,
Mhm.
and because they're zombiotes, the zombie symbiotes, obviously there's like a relationship to death and resurrection in there.
Mhm.
And if there's a character who knows anything about death and resurrection, it's Elektra.
Mhm.
So I wanted to play into that. So that this whole poem that I wrote was like maybe, I don't know, 15 lines long or something, was just about being dead and then being alive and like her relationship with that and how she remembers the smell of death and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And that became the opening narration for the comic. But it started organically. Essentially, I was writing the captions without writing the panels. So I was just writing dialogue.
Right.
But it helped me to unlock her character and unlock her voice, and I felt like I actually got her and her voice.
Mhm.
And that's how I did that. Was just because I wanted it to feel authentic, and I also sent it to a friend of mine who was very into Daredevil comics and was like, "Does this sound like Elektra to you?" And he
Mhm.
said, "Yeah." So. just happened to work out.
Is there the part of you that still is like, oh my gosh, I'm writing for Daredevil now, and I'm doing. I mean, it's
Sure.
a kid who grew up reading comics, and now here you are in the Marvel universe.
Yeah, I mean, there's some jobs that I get, and I literally am like, did they call the wrong guy? Like, I don't. And and I'll just one of them recently, I went for a long walk, and
Mhm.
I just like couldn't believe it. I was like, I needed to just like it seemed unreal to me that this was like actually happening. But yeah, I mean, the Daredevil thing was different because I didn't really, I don't know. I felt like it was also like I was a very tight deadline too, so I didn't really have too much time to think about it.
Right.
Kind of just had to do it. And so that was that. But then this other stuff that's coming down the road, that stuff is amazing. I mean, I'm doing a turtle story for the Black, White, and Green
Mhm.
anthology, and that was fun. I'm not really like huge into the turtles, but I was huge into them when I was a kid.
Right.
And so that was fun to be able to play with that a little bit. And obviously Creep Show as well and EC stuff, which is all, obviously original, but it's just fun to play in that universe and do those things. So I mean it's like I'm the luckiest guy. I get to do all this stuff and play with these characters and in these in these universes, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, it's really fantastic and just get to play with a lot of toys
Mhm.
that aren't mine. And I get to do what I want with them, but I have to return them when I'm done.
Well, I'm curious. Well, which do you prefer? Because you've done a good run on that Texas Blood. Now you're also doing, shorter runs for different characters here and there. Do you like having the same run, or do you like kind of bouncing around and trying out different things?
Well, I mean, we always kind of were bouncing around, even with that Texas Blood. I mean, to an extent. I mean, even, if you include Enfield in that run,
Right.
um, which I do. I mean, we bounce around through time. We get to see characters in different places and all, in different places in their life, like metaphorically, obviously. So it's like, we were always doing that to an extent. But do I enjoy writing new characters, different characters, pre-established characters? Yeah, I mean, certainly. I don't know if I enjoy it as much as creating my own characters because you have a relationship with them,
Mhm.
and there's no sense of responsibility. Like I don't have to worry about what fans are going to think or anything like that. And at a certain point with big two stuff, you kind of just have to wash your hands of it and just kind of step back and be like, I did what I could,
Right.
and this is not on me. I in that's the I've done this with night people, and I've done it with other stuff too, where I just kind of I say my piece,
Mhm.
I make my point clear and my stance clear, and I'm like, you guys can either do it or not. And the
Right.
same thing with the EC stuff. Like there's it's not a big thing, but it was in my first story for the EC thing. There was just one line that I had written a certain way, and they wanted it another way, just to make it sort of to fit in closer to what the EC idea is.
Right.
And I was like, I was willing to amend it, but I was like, just so you know, like I really think that it works the other way too.
Mhm.
But you win some, you lose some, and I lost that one, but it's okay. Um, but if editorial and the people that are paying you want it to be a certain way, they're going to do it that way. I get annoyed sometimes with I don't really like having an editor.
Mhm.
I'm sure that they're helpful to some people, and maybe I just haven't met the right editor yet.
Mhm.
But like I worked with Ben Abernathy now, who's the Batman guy for the longest time, and I've wanted to work with him forever. I wanted to work with him on Batman if I could have,
Right.
obviously, but unfortunately that'll never happen now. But I was lucky to be able to work with him on Creep Show, and
Mhm.
I was like, oh my God, what is this going to be like? And he was just the easiest person to work with, and it was fantastic.
Right.
But in terms of the sort of the so he was great,
Mhm.
but he kind of lets you do what you want to do,
Right.
so and that's the thing about him is that he's very receptive to your ideas and is very open to it.
Mhm.
Whereas I feel like some of the other places that I worked, you kind of end up hitting walls,
Yeah.
separate walls,
Mhm.
and you're just sitting there like kind of like, well, I came in with an idea and now it's not that idea anymore. And
Right.
so that's a thing that happens sometimes. I mean, this year has just been kind of a whirlwind because I've done so many things for so many different companies,
Mhm.
which has been fantastic. I mean, I did a Dread story, I did a Turtle story, Daredevil, so I mean, it's like I'm doing a lot of stuff. So I'm getting to see what it's like out there, like, getting to see the landscape and all that, and kind of what places are like and what sort of the norm is.
Right.
And I know what I like and I know what I don't like, and I'm not to be hard-headed about it or to be, antagonistic. It's just personally, I think that there's one way of working that is conducive with creative work, and I think there's another that's not. And some people are able to work in that way, and other people aren't. And I don't think I'm one of those people who can. I mean, I can, but it's not the way that I want to work. And I also think that I have a voice in the industry that like people enjoy and they think is authentic.
Yeah.
And I think that they'll be able to tell when it's, tampered with. You
Exactly.
know, and which is, not ideal, but again, you get hired to do a job, and if the owner of the building wants to add duct tape to the pipe, that's out of my hands. You know, I can only do so much. I just lay the pipe.
One last question, and it's because you created your own universe. Could you ever see passing the torch to another writer and having them take on these characters, or are you so invested that you couldn't imagine someone else choosing that different directions for them?
See, I'm actually the kind of person I would love to do like an anthology series or something where we hand off the characters and the universe to the people and let them play in it because I want to see what they're going to do.
Right.
So I would love to do that. I don't think we're in the place where that would happen. I don't think we're big enough to have that happen. I mean, maybe somewhere down the road.
Right.
But yeah, I would totally be open to that. Frankly, I'd love that. I love the idea of getting to see some, these characters live beyond me. I think that's fantastic. Yeah, I think that would be fantastic. I would love to see somebody else write. I mean, I would probably want to have some sort of input to be like, oh, I don't think they'd say that or whatever.
Right.
But I do think that it's really fun to kind of look at, I think that comes down to even just, because I'm now in the industry and I have friends who are in the industry and I get this, they'll send me, good friend of mine, Julio Anta and Jacoby Salcido,
Mhm.
um, just had this new Blue Beetle book that's coming out later in the year in October, I believe. And I get to read their interpretation of Blue Beetle, and it's fantastic. I love that. I get to experience that, and I also just love, I've always loved getting to read, various creators' takes on Batman or Superman or whomever, Green Lantern,
Right.
Green Arrow, Flash. I can name the gamut of them. I love, there's certain characters that you love written by certain creators. Daredevil, um, Spider-Man, I have my favorite Spider-Man writers and artists. I have my favorite Daredevil writers and artists. I mentioned Frank Miller, obviously. But Denny O'Neil is a favorite.
Mhm.
Uh, Obviously, I mean, he's one of the greats. But there's so many things, to kind of, look at. And I feel like that would apply to my own creation as well. Like I don't feel like I want to hold it so tightly to me that I wouldn't let other people do it. I would love to do an anthology. I don't really know what that would look like. I know Declan Shalvey just did an anthology. Oh, I think it's a one shot, but I think he did an anthology for his old dog book. And I'm very curious to ask him about what the back end breakdown was and how he went about it, because that's the thing that would hold me back from doing it, is that I frankly don't make that much money doing what we do.
Mhm.
So like, how do I pay people to do it? Is it just on the back end? So that would be kind of how I would need to approach it, is like figuring out how we pay people to do the work and how we split it, like what the royalty situation looks like. That's like what it would take for me to understand it to do it. But I just don't have that uh, in my repertoire at this point. So at this point, nobody's writing it but me.
Gotcha.
But I'd be open to it. I just think that's exciting.
Mhm.
And I like things that are exciting and new and different. I can only do so much. I'm only one person. I'm only one person. I'm one brain. I can't. I don't have. I'm not the smartest person in the world.
Mhm.
Uh, I think what I do well is I do character well, and I think that's something that. obviously publishers are taking note of, and like that's what I get a lot of work right now.
Mhm.
But it's like, that's something that I do well, but I'd love to see somebody do something else in this world that we've created.
Mhm.
I think that'd be so exciting to have somebody else do something else because you don't get that opportunity all that often to see outside of yourself, because I've been living in that world for so long that, somebody else takes it and runs with it. Oh my God, I never would have thought of that, like things like that. I just think that's exciting.
That makes
So,
sense to me. And because I was about to ask you, do you ever worry about hitting a wall with the characters?
um, no, not really. I mean, I think that you do hit a wall sometimes.
Mhm.
And I think that like, there's the classic story about Stephen King writing The Stand where he hit a wall and he just like, oh, I'm just going to put a bomb in the camp.
Right.
He just literally blew it up, and all of a sudden now his characters have a new thing to deal with, and it's yeah, okay, so that's how you deal with it. But like, I don't ever think I have a wall to hit because I kind of know where things are going for certain characters, um, and also that they're like I said before, they're kind of like living people to me. Like try to let it be organic, and I think if you let it be organic, there's never a wall.
Right.
It's sort of like just with old friends where you pick up the phone and you catch up, and you see where they're at. So I don't ever think of it in terms of that. I mean, in terms of stories,
Mhm.
maybe, but also you could do anything. And the way that we've established our series already with that Texas Blood specifically, is that we're on the genre wheel, as I like to say, where we get to do, neo-noir, neo-western, we get to do a cult kind of horror story, race to find this girl who's been kidnapped. We get to do a serial killer story, thriller. We got to do a western, an old-fashioned western, our own way, and then the next one is going to be a heist. So it's like we get to build on a genre wheel, like what we want to do. And it's, part of it's like, what would we do with that genre? What would we do there? What would we do there? And, there's other, we talked to the great comic book couples counseling podcast about, they had mentioned this to us. And, I can't say I haven't, haven't thought about it. So, but it's like doing a sort of very far back, going back even before it was colonized, that sort of Texas, and like looking at that. So we could do that at some point if we wanted to. It'd probably be a one shot. I can't really imagine we do a series on that, but that stuff is there, and I think that it's all fair game because we're telling the story as much about the people in the county as we are about the county itself.
Right.
And so that's the thing is that, you're dealing with a history and we've built out this history so well that I don't think that it will ever grow stale.
And we are back. Chris is going to have such a bright future in this industry. As I said earlier, these are big projects he's doing. The big two and Image, they had faith in him, and they had faith in him to put him on big books. He really knows how to tell a wonderful story. You can tell from what he said, he loves that Texas Blood books. That's sort of his heart and soul. But it's really going to be fascinating to see how he goes to these other characters and what he brings to the table there. I'm sure it'll be interesting, and I'm sure it'll be a fun read for everyone. We'd love to have Chris back on down the road because, you know, as I said, he's a rising star. So we're happy to have gotten a chance to talk to him. And we're happy that you guys took the time to listen to us this week. Hope you guys enjoyed all the different episodes. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you back here on Monday. Bye.